The Ikari delegation had not always looked so bold in front of the council. Years earlier, when their caste system still bound them in chains of duty and submission, a young Ikari named Thalen had slipped away from his assigned role as a record keeper. He had been restless, curious, always peering at the stars in ways his elders discouraged. On a trade mission to a human colony, he met children his own age who asked him questions no Ikari would ever dare. What do you want to be? What would you build if no one stopped you? Thalen had no answer, because his people had never allowed him to imagine. The humans laughed, not unkindly, but with a spark that caught in him like fire on dry grass. He spent weeks among them, watching miners share their tools. Children play without hierarchy. Elders listened to the voices of the young as if they mattered. When he returned home, he could not keep quiet. His whisper spread among his peers, then his siblings, until whole clusters of young Ikari began to resist their castes. The rebellion was not bloody. It was stranger, quieter, a refusal to obey the old order. And the old order crumbled, not under war, but under the weight of an idea carried back from humans: choice. The Madar were even older, a proud race of scale philosophers whose councils had ruled by bloodline for 20,000 years. Their leaders were chosen by ancestry, and their ancestry was guarded with rituals as rigid as stone. When the humans came, they came with their rough clothes and imperfect speech and endless, irritating questions. A human farmer once dined with the Madar Council, and when asked what family gave him his authority, he simply shrugged and said, "None. I just work the land." The council laughed at the absurdity, but the younger Madar did not. For the first time, they realized authority might not need to be inherited. It could be earned. In the years that followed, the council halls of the Madar trembled as citizens demanded voices of their own. No army could have conquered the Madar, but a single human farmer, with his callous hands and plain words, planted a seed of change that reshaped their empire. On the distant moons of Calvis, the HFY once built vast monasteries where silence was enforced for decades at a time. They believed stillness brought them closer to the cosmic truth. Then a group of human explorers arrived, stranded by a storm, and with nothing else to do, they began to sing. They sang around fires, in the darkness of broken ships, in the echoing chambers of alien halls. The HFY had never heard such a thing, not noise, but voices woven together into something larger than themselves. At first they hid in the shadows, trembling. Then slowly, one by one, they joined. The song spread like contagion through their monasteries. Silence was no longer their only truth. Sound became sacred too. To this day, HFY choirs echo across their moons, harmonies that carry traces of human melodies first sung out of loneliness. For every race, the stories multiplied. The Kelvari had once culled their weak, until they saw humans care for the sick and return stronger because of it. The Veil had once forbidden mingling between bloodlines, until they saw human families formed by choice, by love, by adoption across every line imaginable. Even the warlike Ralik, who prided themselves on conquest, found themselves unsettled by human persistence. They fought humans in skirmishes, expecting easy victory. Instead, they found adversaries who would lose a battle, lose a planet, lose a fleet, and still return scarred but unbroken. The Ralik began to whisper among themselves, not of conquest, but of caution, for they realized they could defeat human armies, but not humanity itself. The council had thought themselves eternal. Their traditions, their hierarchies, their ways of life had endured for millennia unchanged. But humanity did not conquer them with weapons or wealth. Humanity conquered them with survival, with stubbornness, with a refusal to live as anything less than free. Wherever humans went, they carried their history like a torch, of fires built in ice ages, of fields sown after plagues, of families rebuilt after wars. They did not ask for permission to share it. They simply lived it and others saw. And one seen it could not be unseen. Ambassador Juno's words had not been rehearsed. They were lived. Every alien in that chamber could trace some thread of her truth back to their own people, their own children, their own quiet rebellion sparked by human presence. That was why some hated humanity, because they could not unmake what had been made. But others looked at them with something closer to awe, For in a galaxy of ancient empires, it was the youngest race that reminded them what it meant to be alive. And so, when the chamber finally quieted, when the arguments had burned down to embers, the truth was undeniable. Humanity had not just changed alien society. Humanity had made it remember itself. And whether the galaxy welcomed that or feared it, the change would never be undone. At first, the galaxy responded like a storm split across two skies. On one side, worlds opened their gates wider to humanity, eager to weave them deeper into the fabric of their cultures. On the other, old empires hardened, desperate to defend what pieces of tradition remained unshaken. The Great Council Chamber became the stage of not just debate, but of history itself, a place where every faction of the galaxy could no longer ignore that humanity had left fingerprints on their souls. The Ikari, once a rigid caste species, astonished everyone when they arrived at the council draped not in the uniforms of their old roles, but in colors of their own choosing. They walked unshackled, heads lifted, no longer afraid to meet the eyes of the elders who once ruled them. Their leader, Thalen, the same record keeper who had once stolen human questions, stood before the council with trembling hands. "We are no longer what we were," he said. "We are something new, and we would never have seen it had not the humans shown us that destiny is not given, it is built." His words rippled across the chamber like a wave, and many alien youth watching through the hollow broadcast felt a shiver in their bones. But not all were moved to admiration. The VY Arkesh, a species whose empire thrived on strict obedience, watched this contagion of ideas with growing horror. Their High Lord hissed his advisors after Thalen spoke. "If the humans are not checked, our young will soon ask the same questions. Questions we cannot allow." They began drafting decrees, new restrictions, tighter control of information, punishments for those who dared imitate humanity. Yet the more they tightened their grip, the more their youth slipped through their fingers. Smuggled human books, songs, even recordings of laughter found their way into VY Arkesh cities. Passed in whispers. In the Madar halls, something different unfolded. The philosophers, who once argued endlessly over abstract riddles, now debated a new question. Should leadership still flow by bloodline, or should it be earned by deed? Younger Madar, who had grown restless under ancient rituals, began staging assemblies in the open squares, mimicking the town halls of human colonies they had visited. The elders tried to dismiss it as childish mimicry, but the crowds only grew larger, their chants echoing across their golden citadels. "Let us speak. Let us choose." Meanwhile, the humans themselves seemed almost bewildered by the storm they had caused. To them, they were only surviving, only carrying forward the stubborn refusal to kneel that had shaped them since the first caves and fires. Ambassador Juno, after her speech, returned to her quarters in silence, knowing she had stirred the galaxy but uncertain if it would end in unity or blood. Her aides asked her if she had meant to ignite revolutions across half the council. She smiled faintly and shook her head. "We don't ignite revolutions," she said. "We live. Others see the fire and decide if they want warmth or to burn." The galaxy soon fractured further. The Ralic warlords, both enraged and fascinated, began sending emissaries not to conquer, but to observe human militias. Their young warriors demanded to spar with humans, curious about what gave them such resilience. When they lost, and they often did not rage. They listened, slowly, dangerously. Admiration crept into the hearts of those bred only for conquest. And in the shadows, their elders whispered of civil war. Everywhere, change swirled. Entire societies shifted, pulled like planets caught in the gravity of a new star. Humanity had not asked for it. Humanity could not stop it. What began as whispers of freedom and defiance became the drumbeat of a new age. Some called it dangerous. Others called it inevitable. But no one could deny that when humanity walked among the stars, they left trails that no empire could erase. In secret chambers, the VY Arkesh and a few others began to meet, not to debate, but to plan. They feared that humanity would not just change the galaxy, they would unravel it. To them, humans were not builders, singers, dreamers. They were a plague of ideas, infecting the young, toppling the old. And in hushed tones, they vowed to stop the plague before it consumed them all. Yet even as these plots darken the galaxy's corners, somewhere else, on a quiet world scarred by old wars, a child was learning to sing a human song. Her scaled throat stumbled on the notes, her people's language not made for such sounds, but she tried anyway. Around her, other children gathered, curious, unafraid. And in their voices, cracked and clumsy, something new was born. Humanity had changed alien society forever, and it was only the beginning. The secret alliance met in the void, on a station with no name, hidden between two dying stars where no trade routes passed. The HFY were there, cloaked in ceremonial armor that reflected none of the faint starlight. Alongside them came the ZRTH, insectoid tacticians whose hive queens whispered through chemical speech. The Tovari arrived as well, a species of crystalline beings who had endured for millennia by guarding tradition as though it were treasure. They called themselves the Preservation Pact. To them, humanity was not simply dangerous, it was corrosive. Our empires were built on obedience, hissed the HFY High Lord, his eyes like shards of obsidian. On order, and yet everywhere these humans step, rebellion follows like shadow. If they remain unchecked, our children will not belong to us. They will belong to their ideas. The ZRTH Queen's envoy clattered her mandibles. We have seen it already. A drone spoke of wanting a name, not a designation, not a number. A name. It learned this from human workers stranded in our territory. This cannot be allowed. The crystalline Tovari's voice rang like glass struck by wind. But how do you stop an idea? Armies cannot burn thought. We must extinguish the source. The chamber quieted. Everyone knew what that meant. Plans began to take form: blockades, trade restrictions, covert assassinations of human diplomats. The Pact dreamed of isolating Earth itself, cutting it off from the rest of the galaxy before its cultural infection spread too deep. Yet even as they conspired, messages of resistance echoed across their own populations. The youth of their worlds had already tasted humanity, and they would not spit out so easily. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, something entirely different was happening. Small colonies of aliens who had once distrusted each other began gathering under banners that bore not human symbols, but human words. Unity, freedom, choice. They were not human colonies, but alien ones, inspired by humans. An Ikari poet, a Madar philosopher, and a Heshtai singer joined together to form what became known as the Concord of Free Peoples. They claimed they were not led by humans at all, only inspired by them. Their gatherings were peaceful but powerful, drawing millions across systems. For the first time in recorded galactic history, entire races began speaking of themselves not as subjects of ancient empires, but as individuals. Back on Earth, humanity itself was divided. Many were astonished at their habits. Singing, questioning, debating, building, were tearing down pillars older than their species. Some argued they should step back, retreat to their own world, and let the galaxy resolve its own struggles. But others believed it was too late for that. We didn't choose this, Ambassador Juno said in a message broadcast across the interstellar networks. But we will not apologize for who we are. If our existence challenges you, perhaps it is your traditions that are the weakness, not us. Her word became fire. Across alien worlds, they were banned, censored, condemned, and copied, translated, passed in secret. Children carved them into walls. Workers whispered them in factories. Rebels painted them in bright colors across city towers. The Preservation Pact raged, but every attempt to smother the fire only fanned it. On a distant mining station run by the Rallic, a small act sparked the first open clash. A group of Rallic youths refused orders to bow to their warlord, claiming, "We are not slaves. We are people." When guards moved to punish them, human dock workers stepped between unarmed, refusing to move. Violence erupted, and by the time it was quelled, the news had spread. It was no longer just an idea. It was a movement. The Preservation Pact responded with force. Fleets were mobilized under the guise of protecting stability. Human colonies were threatened. The Concord of Free Peoples was declared illegal, but the galaxy had already shifted. Armies could march, ships could burn, but the voices of those who had tasted choice could not be silenced. On Ikari Prime, children sang human songs in defiance of their elders. On Madar Citadels, commoners stood in council squares demanding votes. Even in the deepest hives of the ZRTH, drones whispered their new names in secret. And as the conflict grew, humanity stood at the center, not as conquerors, but as a spark. They had not intended to lead revolutions, yet revolutions bloomed around them, as unstoppable as spring after a long winter. The galaxy was breaking, remaking, reshaping itself. And for the first time, the question was not whether humanity could survive among the stars, but whether the stars themselves could survive humanity's relentless light. The storm broke faster than anyone expected. The Preservation Pact, after years of whispering and planning, unleashed their fleets in a coordinated strike. Human colonies at the edges of explored space went dark within hours. Trade convoys were intercepted, ambassadors assassinated, and the first direct assault on Earth's outlined offenses shook humanity's fragile confidence. For the first time, the galaxy's hostility was not hidden in politics or subterfuge. It came screaming on engines of war. Ambassador Juno stood in the emergency chambers of the United Earth Assembly, her face carved with exhaustion. Around her, generals and diplomats argued in raised voices, their words like gunfire. Some demanded immediate retaliation, a declaration of war against the pact. Others pleaded for restraint, fearing that open conflict would unite even neutral empires against humanity. Juno listened, then rose, her voice cutting through the storm. They fear us not for our fleets, but for our voices. They are not fighting our weapons. They are fighting what we represent. If we meet them with only war, we become the thing they accuse us of. We must answer differently. But humanity was not alone anymore. Even as the pact tightened its grip, the concord of free peoples surged to life. Alien ships, painted with bright banners instead of emblems of empire, arrived at human colonies bearing food, medicine, and weapons. Ikari volunteers stood shoulder to shoulder with human soldiers. Madar philosophers recorded messages of defiance and broadcast them across the galaxy. The Heshtai sang battle hymns in tones so strange and beautiful that human troops wept as they prepared for war. The first major battle erupted in the Jaxer system, where a packed fleet of VYRKesh destroyers tried to seize a key transit hub. Human warships were outnumbered 3-1. Their technology still crude compared to the ancient empires, but they fought with ferocity that shocked their enemies. Where the pact expected retreat, they found ships ramming at impossible odds, crews refusing surrender, engineers fighting with plasma torches when weapons failed. Just as the humans were about to break, Ikari and Madar reinforcements arrived, their fleets bearing no empire's insignia, only the sigil of the Concord. Together, they forced the pact to retreat. News of the victory spread like wildfire. For the first time, aliens and humans had fought not as overlord and subject, but as equals bound by choice. Across the galaxy, more worlds rose. A crystalline Tovari scholar defected, denouncing his people's leaders. ZRTH drones broke from their hives and formed independent bands, claiming freedom in strange, halting voices. Even among the VYRKesh, whispers of rebellion reached the children of High Lords. The pact cracked under its own weight, but the pact was not finished. Desperation hardened them. The VYRKesh High Lord called for final purity, a campaign to annihilate humanity utterly, to burn Earth until no spark of the contagion remained. Armadas converged, darker and larger than anything seen in generations. For all their victories, the Concord and humanity were still young, still fragile. If Earth fell, the dream would die with it. In orbit above Earth, fleets gathered for the stand that would decide not just the planet, but the shape of the galaxy's future. The skies filled with ships, some gleaming with alien metal, some patched together from human industry. On the ground, billions watched, their breaths held. Juno stood on the command deck of the flagship Resolute Dawn, her hands gripping the railing as the stars shimmered with the engines of war. The battle began with silence, then exploded in fire. Packed dreadnoughts loomed like dark mountains, their beams cutting through shields and hulls with brutal precision. Human ships darted like wolves, fast and reckless, sacrificing themselves to punch holes in the enemy lines. Ikari cruisers, once built for obedience, now fought with chaotic brilliance, turning disorder into strategy. HFY singers broadcast harmonics across channels, confusing enemy targeting systems with waves of sound and code. Every culture that had once feared change now wielded it as a weapon, but the pack pressed harder. One by one, Concord ships broke apart under the onslaught. The enemy drove closer to Earth, to the blue-green planet at the heart of it all. On the surface, humanity prepared for the unthinkable planetary invasion. Families gathered in shelters, soldiers dug into defenses, and children sang the songs their parents had taught them, human songs that had once lit the stars. Then came the turning point. A HFY cruiser, one of the most feared in the enemy fleet, suddenly broke formation. Its weapons turned not against humans, but against its own dreadnought. In a blaze of fire, it shattered the pack's tight advance. Across the battle lines, alien defectors rose up. Ships switched sides mid-combat. Drones turned their guns on their queens. The idea the pack had tried so hard to kill had bloomed even among their own. The battle raged until the stars themselves seemed to burn. When at last the smoke cleared, Earth still stood. The packed fleets were shattered, their unity broken forever. And in the silence that followed, a truth became undeniable. Humanity had not just survived, they had transformed the galaxy. Juno's message echoed through every channel, in every tongue. We are not your rulers. We are not your conquerors. We are your mirror. If you see freedom in us, it is because you are always capable of it yourselves. And so began the new era, not of human dominance, but of shared defiance. The galaxy's oldest empires had fallen, not to weapons, but to something far more dangerous: hope. When the fires of the great battle finally dimmed, the galaxy found itself in silence, a silence heavier than war itself. Entire fleets hung in ruins across star systems, shattered hulks drifting like scars in the void. On Earth, the skies were clear again, but the people looked upward with both pride and unease. They had survived the unthinkable. They had stood against the combined wrath of ancient empires. Yet survival was only the beginning. Now came the harder question: what future had they carved from the ashes? The Concord of Free Peoples held its first official gathering not in a grand council chamber, but on the battered surface of Earth itself. In the shadow of a crater where a packed missile had nearly struck, delegates from dozens of species walked the ground, some still limping from wounds, others wearing the marks of rebellion, tattoos of choice, painted banners, improvised emblems that bore no one empire's name. They stood not above humanity, but beside them. Ambassador Juno spoke first. Her voice, steady though her body, trembled with fatigue. We are not here to replace old chains with new ones. We are here because the galaxy has remembered what it means to breathe freely. Let no one take that from us again. For some, those words brought relief. For others, fear, in the ruins of the Preservation Pact. Fragments of leadership still lingered. The HFY High Lord had escaped the battlefield, fleeing into the dark with a loyal remnant of his fleet. The Zarth Queens sealed their hives, their whispers filled with venom, vowing to rise again. The Tovari elders clung to their citadels of crystal, pretending the war had not shattered their control. Though the pact was broken, the hunger for domination had not vanished. It never did. But among their people, something irreversible had taken root. Young HFY, who had once bowed without question, now refused to kneel. Zarth drones sang names to each other in secret tunnels. Even the Tovari's crystalline children etched human words into their brittle walls. Choice, voice, future. The old rulers tried to crush these sparks, but the sparks were too many. On the other hand, the Concord grew bolder. The Ikari, once divided by castes, sent envoys elected freely for the first time in their history. The Madar abandoned bloodline councils, experimenting with assemblies where anyone could speak. The HFY, whose voices once echoed only in silence, now filled the skies with songs that blended their alien harmonics with human tones. For them, the war was not just survival, it was rebirth. Humanity, too, had changed. No longer the uncertain newcomers at the edge of the galaxy, they found themselves at the center of a storm of hope and suspicion alike. Farmers who had once worried only about soil and seasons now received visitors from alien worlds, asking how plant crops how to feed their people without oppression. Engineers share designs freely, their inventions no longer hidden in patents but gifted as seeds of trust. Soldiers who fought in the Great Battle returned to find statues erected in their honor, not just by humans, but by alien children who saw them as symbols of courage. Yet humanity resisted the temptation of empire. The assembly voted against declaring themselves rulers of a new order. "We are not made for thrones," Juno said. "We are made for work, for building, for sharing." It was this refusal to dominate that stunned the galaxy most. In a universe scarred by conquest and control, humans had shown they could fight and then step back. For many, that act proved more powerful than their victories in war. Still, shadows lingered. Whispers spoke of the High Lord's fleet gathering strength in the dark voids, of rogue warlords preying on colonies too weak to defend themselves, of old traditions twisting and mutating into dangerous cults. The galaxy was fragile, its future uncertain, and in that fragility, every small act mattered. On a backwater mining moon, a young Zarth drone, once nameless, stood before her hive and declared her chosen identity. Her voice shook, but she did not bow. The hive paused, the silence heavy. Then one by one, others spoke names too, until the cavern echoed with hundreds of voices, a chorus of individuality. The queen hissed in fury, but she could not stop them. On Ikari Prime, a child asked his mother what caste he belonged to. She smiled and said, "None. You belong only to yourself." For the first time in their long history, the child laughed without fear. On Earth, a human boy sat beside an alien girl with crystalline skin, both watching the stars rise above a recovering city. "Do you think they'll come back?" he asked softly. The girl tilted her glowing head. "The old rulers? Maybe. But if they do, we will face them together." Their small hands clasped, two children who carried the weight of a galaxy yet to be born. Thus the galaxy did not settle into peace like a stone into water. It shivered and shifted, trembled and rebuilt. There were still battles to fight, still tyrants to oppose, still wounds to heal. But for the first time, there was a sense that change was possible, that chains would break, that songs would rise, that choice could endure. And at the heart of it all, humanity stood not as masters, but as mirrors, reminding every race that the impossible could be done, that survival was not enough, and that the stars themselves were not the limit. The secret history of the galaxy would remember this age not as the era of war, nor even as the rise of humanity, but as a moment when countless voices, human and alien alike, learned to speak in harmony. And though the Preservation Pact plotted in the shadows, though the threat of darkness always lingered, one truth had become unshakable. The galaxy had already changed forever, and there was no going back.